Oh, today we've got such a treat. We've got Mr. Dan Powers, Danny Boy.
Dan Powers has been practicing as a sex coach for almost 2 decades, and he has quite a background in a number of different modalities. He brings
So
in
many.
Tantra, surrogate partner therapy. Now, what the hell is that? You're going to learn all about it in this episode. Somatic sex education, sexological bodywork, erotic blueprint, and Kadoshka, which he touches on a little bit. Very interesting stuff. You're going to love this one. So tune in,
Yeah.
turn on, and fall in love with Dan.
Fall in love with Danny Boy.
Welcome to the Sex Reimagined Podcast, where sex is shame-free and pleasure-forward. Let's get into the show.
Dan Powers. I love you, Dan.
I love you too.
Yay, Dan. We're here with Dan Powers. We're so excited. This is going to be a juicy topic today. I'm excited.
Me too.
Yes. So, Dan, you have so many skills and talents and training. You've studied everywhere. And one of the things that really intrigues me, and I think will intrigue the audience, is sex surrogacy. And I would love for you to just define it and let us know and our audience know how sex surrogacy works and some of your experience
Perfect.
with it.
Well, the first thing I'd like to do is clear up the languaging. We don't call it sex surrogacy. There is something called sex surrogacy. And to me, that is more somebody who is really just stepping in to have sex with a client for whatever reason. We call this surrogate partner therapy. And the difference is we are modeling a relationship, so a partnership with a client. Everything from the very beginning of, hi, my name's Dan. My favorite color is blue. What's your sign? All that kind of crap that we would go through in a relationship. And then everything between until the conscious uncoupling that we do. And so, there's
Cool.
everything that's in there. Now, we're not going out on dates. We're not doing any of that kind of stuff, but, really modeling the intimacy of relationship and then educating our clients. The movie, The Session with Helen Hunt, who was nominated for whatever the award is that they get for movies.
The Academy Award?
Yeah, or Oscars or Grammys
So
or
one of
something like
those,
that.
Golden
I don't
Globe or
pay
an
attention to that crap.
Oscar and Academy
Yeah,
Awards is the
and
same thing.
so it was a really good movie, and there was a lot of misleading information that was a part of it, but it was still a very valuable movie. Like, for example, one of the things that she did when she came into her client and kind of set the premise behind the story, there was a guy who developed polio, I think at about the age of 10, Mark O'Brien, and he's now an adult and he's never been intimate with a person. And as a polio person, you can feel, but your muscles don't work. And so he would have these female attendants that would be giving him baths and he would get erections. And of course, he would be shamed and embarrassed by that, but he still had these desires. And so he went to his father, who was played by William Macy. So it had a pretty all-star cast. And
Yeah.
I asked him, I was like, hey, I would like to be intimate with somebody. I'd like to see what it's like. And William Macy said, well, I think God would be okay with this. I say, go for it. And so he actually does. And he works with a woman named Cheryl Cohen Green. This is based on a true story. Cheryl Cohen Green was played by Helen Hunt. And in their first session together, they actually have her get naked. And that is not what happens that's what I would call a sex surrogate or a sacred intimate or something like
Okay.
that. In surrogate partner therapy, that's not how it happens at all. My first session with the client is with the therapist. It's a triadic model. So we are in the room with the therapist having this initial conversation. And then after that first one, the therapist is not in the room with us, but we do have conversations with her. It's like a marriage and family therapist who is working with a couple. The only difference is we're not going to the therapist at the same time. Yeah,
Together?
we have
Okay.
conversation after my session with the client. I then call up the therapist, have a conversation with her saying, okay, here's what she did. Here's what happened. Here's what I think is going on. Here's what I think are next steps. And then the therapist talks to the client, says, okay, what's going on? And, so that way, anything that may come up that my client would have some shame about or didn't acknowledge, or there's something going on that she feels safer to talk to the therapist can then bring it back to me. And it works out really, really valuably that way.
I think this
So,
is so cool.
yeah, it's fascinating. And so primarily you're working with singles so that they can overcome patterns in relationships, or do you also work with couples as well in
No,
this
this
way?
is purely a single in my case, single
Okay.
female
Yeah.
that I work with. Now there are female surrogates, there are gay surrogates. I cannot model a relationship with a man. I just that's not in my bones to be able to do that. And so I work
Mhm.
predominantly with women. My wife worked with men.
Okay. What you're doing is you're helping them overcome ways that they have been in relationship in the past so that they can pave a new
Yep,
way forward.
exactly.
But I was kind of under the impression
Beautiful.
that a lot of these clients are sort of middle aged and have had very little experience in relationships, of any. Um, is that true? So could you give us a little kind of demographic of the issues that people are coming to explore with this type of partner? Call it again, partnership
Surrogate partner
surrogacy,
therapy.
surrogate
Surrogate
partner
Yeah.
partner
therapy.
therapy.
So, it's funny when I initially did my training in 2013, I thought the same thing. I thought it was going to be the 50, 60-year-old virgin that had never been with a man.
Hmm.
I've had clients anywhere from 32 to 70 at this point in time.
Mm,
And
Okay.
yes,
mm,
they are virgins. They have never been with a man. A lot of them have a lot of religious trauma. Save it for the one you love. And then that person, I've had women who have been in a relationship, but they were saving it because they had to save it for marriage. And finally, the guy that they were with said, "I can't take this anymore. I got to move on." And they had such trauma around it. So I see a lot of Southern Baptists,
mm,
Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses,
mm,
those kinds of people that have this kind of
mm,
trauma around sexuality. And they, in some cases, have been in relationships, uh, but oftentimes they do something to sabotage the relationship, which is where I'm so valuable because I'm the
mhm,
perfect sandbox for them to play in. They can do what it is that they would normally do to kind of push away this relationship as it starts to get intimate and closer. And the therapist is there to kind of say, wait a minute, time out. Do you notice your pattern starting to come up where you're pushing Dan away? Now, can we address that? And then, of course, the therapist comes talk to me and says, hey, did you notice this? Or I may have even pointed it out as well. Um, notice what's going on here and let's figure out how to get through this.
mm.
So
So
is
fascinating.
Yeah, can any therapist do this sort of holding and supporting, or do you have to be specifically trained in this type of work in order to be a therapist working with a surrogate and a
I
client?
would say the only real requirement is that the therapist needs to be comfortable talking about sex. And many,
Hmm.
many of the marriage and family therapists that I know and have interacted with are not. So sex
Mm.
therapists are usually better to talk or to work with. But all of them, I can work with them. I've worked with somatic therapists. I've worked with MFTs. I've worked with sex therapists. And the thing that the therapist needs to understand is that I am not a therapist. So I'm not going to therapize my client. That's the therapist's job. And a lot of therapists, especially the ones that are really uncomfortable with sex and sexual topics, they kind of want to pun it to me and say, okay, you're the expert in this area. You just kind of deal with it. And I'm like, no, I'm getting in the weeds of the relationship. I'm getting, the forest for the trees kind of thing. I'm so deep in the forest that oftentimes I don't necessarily see the big picture. And that's where the therapist is really, really valuable to see what's going on. One of the big questions that always comes up, I do presentations at universities, and the questions always come up. Two questions. One is, do you fall in love with your clients? Or, how do you stop from falling in love with the clients?
Hmm.
It's like, well, we don't. We fall in love with our clients. What better way to show our client a true relationship? And these are true relationships. They
Right.
fall in love with me. I fall in love with
Yeah.
them. Our conscious uncoupling is, there's oftentimes tears. It is very sad.
Mhm.
But the way I look at it is like a parent sending their child off to college. It's like, I've had you for 18 years. I love you to death. Now go out and do something productive with your life. And that's what I want with my clients.
So typically, how long are you with one client? And then also, can you be with more than one client at once? So many questions I have.
Um,
Mhm.
so
I'll
the
start with
easy
those 2.
one is, which I already just forgot the question. What was the second question?
Can
Oh, well,
you
yeah.
have more than one of these
Yes,
at a
absolutely. I
time?
can have multiple clients and do. And so that's not a problem. They obviously have to be spaced out a little bit. Um, and it depends on where we're at in the process. The length of time is interesting. So the movie talked about 6 sessions only. And that is so far away from, I mean, it was made for
That's not
Hollywood.
Right.
enough.
So
Yeah.
it's so far out of the
Yeah.
realm of what we do. We have 2 models. We have an intensive model, which is where a client would come to me or I would go to them for potentially 2 weeks. And I would see them for 3 hours every day for 2 weeks. That would be the shortest time period that I would spend with them. The people who come to see me on a weekly basis, which I think is more ideal because it gives them an opportunity to integrate the work that we're doing. The minimum I've had was 6 months, and the most I've had was 3 years. And so it depends on the client.
Okay.
Okay. So it depends. And so you can't really set that up in advance. Like, this is going to be a 3-month journey. You kind of have to feel it out and
Let it be
adjust as you
organic.
go.
What
Yeah.
we do with all of our clients is say, what is left to learn? So we have a very structured process that we go through that walks us through all the steps of the relationship and connection. There's obviously education pieces that go into it. I tell my clients all the time that they are going to be so much more knowledgeable about their bodies, their partner's bodies, sex in general than their clients are ever going to be. There may be some rare exceptions, but really they are going to have much more information because I'm teaching them and educating them the entire time. So it's an amazing process for sure.
Yeah. So you mean more than their partners, their future partners are
Correct.
ever going to have because you're giving them so much
Correct.
education. Yeah. That's amazing.
So when you're falling in love with someone and you're talking on the phone all the time and you're texting and all the ooh la las, are you going through that process too? Do you find you're having multiple conversations a day just on the phone or via text?
So no, yes, it would be easy to do that. And that's part of the
Mm-hmm.
structure of surrogate partner therapy is that we don't. Because yeah, I could get caught up with my
Okay.
clients and have communication with them every day and get in that NRE type energy, the new relationship energy kinds of things. And while it is a true and real relationship, we try to structure it in such a way that there are some boundaries. And the boundary is that I do not talk to my clients in between sessions other than for clarification purposes, like, hey, am I seeing you this week? Or is something going on? Or I've got to cancel because I just had
But,
appendicitis. I can't work.
but just to,
Um, so those kinds
yeah.
of
Mm-hmm.
things. But no, I'm not reaching out to them. I will reach out to them and say, "Hey, happy birthday!" if I know it's their birthday or something like that, or Merry Christmas.
Okay.
But I don't say, "Oh, how are you doing today?" I was missing your voice and wanted to hear it. And, it was just thinking about you. I don't do those kinds of things, and I let my clients know that and tell them that that is part of a normal relationship, whatever normal might actually mean. But in this structure, I'm not supposed to do that.
So can I ask you a
Of
personal
course.
question, Dan? Are you in a like a committed relationship, monogamous or non-monogamous or poly, or personally your own real full relationship? Are you able to have a partner when doing
Yeah,
this kind
I'm
of
not
work?
like in a relationship. I am in a relationship. I have a lifetime partner. Uh,
Are.
I'm married. I have a wife. We both do sex
Okay.
education kind of work. She's a former
Okay.
sex therapist that let her license go because uh, talk therapy, there's actually a study that I read and came across a number of years ago that said that talk therapy is only 20% effective, whereas somatic therapy is 80% effective. And it
Wow.
It's
really
so
is.
true.
And she let her license go because she got tired of being the person that was really there to help them break up. There'd be one whose foot is out the door
Right.
already, and the other one who's like hanging on, and they would come in and really so that she could say, you two just need to get divorced because it's just not working. So she let that
Right.
license go to do that. But we've both done the surrogate partner work. She's no longer doing it because she took time out to write her own book called The Pleasure Prescription.
Yeah, shout out to
Yeah,
Elizabeth. I love
Elizabeth
you,
Shout
Wood, The
out.
Pleasure
girl.
Prescription. Her and her business partner wrote this book to help women who are dealing with pelvic floor pain or painful intercourse, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, great. That's a lot of work I do
Yeah.
too.
And for me, yes, I identify as polyamorous. And of course, when you say that, it's like, well, what does that mean? Because there's so many different flavors of it. We're in a monopoly
Right.
relationship. Um, Elizabeth is definitely monogamous. I am polyamorous. And this works really well for me because I can get into these relationships. I take nothing away from Elizabeth by being in these relationships other than time. Well, this is time that I'm spending with clients that I would spend with clients anyway. And this is the other reason why we don't do the conversations outside of session work, because it could become very cumbersome to have 3 surrogate clients at the same time and my wife and other clients and that kind of stuff. Just it'd be too time consuming.
Yeah. This is like, talk about Sex Reimagined. Are y'all listening to
Mm.
this and like having your minds expanded and blown wide open by Mr. Dan? This is amazing. I mean, I didn't even know this was really a thing. And so where do you do the training for this? And how long does it
So
take?
surrogate partner therapy has been around since Masters and Johnson. In fact, they're the ones that invented it.
Okay.
If you watch the series Masters of Sex, they actually alluded to it a little bit. Unfortunately, again, Hollywood, twisted it to their desires, but they kind of held it on the down low because a lot of people would look at it and go, "Are you kidding? You can't have." And predominantly, they worked with men that were having sexual dysfunctions. So they would bring in a woman that would help. And Vina Blanchard, who is the president of IPSA, the International Professional Surrogates Association, she was actually trained by Masters and Johnson. So it's been going on for 50 years at this point in time. So that's a great place to get trained. It's ipsa.us. There's a number of them, surrogatepartnertherapy.com, I think. But ipsa.us is the one that I always use because it's super easy to say. The training is, there's a little bit of training that you do ahead of time, reading and things like that. There is a 2-week intensive that you do with Vina and potentially other trainers where you're going through the entire process. And then you have a mentorship program that goes on after that. And so for me, it took, I think it was 2 years before I was certified.
So you kind of go at your own pace then,
And it depends.
tuning in
Yeah,
with
and
this
being
program.
a cisgender heterosexual male, it is much more difficult for females to come work with me because our
Mhm.
culture says that women shouldn't be having sex or be aroused or turned on and seeking pleasure anyway. They should just shut it down, keep their legs closed. That's what religion has taught them. That's what their parents have taught them since they were little girls. And so oftentimes they shut it down. And I'm always so honored when a woman does choose to come work with me because she has thrown that smothering mantle off and decided to move forward with her pleasure because this is something that's really important for humanity. Men, on the other hand, because you're not a real man, again, in our culture, if you're not having sex. So men who are having difficulties with this, they're absolutely willing to pay for it and seek it out and do it. If they've heard about it, if they learn about it, then they're absolutely willing to work towards it. There are currently, I didn't see the numbers, but I saw the list of surrogates that are out there. There's like 3 or 4 heterosexual men that are surrogates right now. and probably 40 women and probably
Interesting.
another 10 gay or bisexual men that do this work
Okay.
through IPSA.
Interesting. So
So
you're one of 3 then. You're really
Yeah.
an anomaly.
so I imagine people like from out of state, right? If there's only less than you can count on your hand,
Yeah,
surrogates and niching
that's
in your
amazing.
particular space, do you have a lot of people that fly in to do this work with you? Do you fly out of state to work with them? What does
I
that look
did
like?
both. I have flown to California a number of times to do this work. Last year, I was probably in California for 2 or 3 months. Um, This year, I was in Arizona for a couple weeks working with a client. My preference is that they come to me because it's very disruptive
Mhm.
to what it is that I'm doing in the world. And so that's obviously my preference. But yeah, it's all over
Mhm.
the place. And we're constantly doing, I say we, IPSA is constantly doing new teachings. And so while I'm probably one of 3 certified surrogate partners, there are other men who are coming through who are not certified that, they're working very closely with their mentor. So they will work with clients as well.
And so are you also a mentor?
I haven't as of yet. I haven't put my name in to be a mentor. Uh, I just have so many other things going on that if somebody needed me to, I would, but I try to pass it on to people that have even more experience than I do.
How
Yeah,
lucrative is this kind
Not
of thing?
very.
well, that's a good question.
Not
Yeah.
very. Yeah, like what can you charge as compared to some of your other sex therapy modalities that you work with?
So I charge 200 an hour or whatever the therapist charges. So if the therapist charges 300 an hour, then I get a charge 300 an hour. In the intensive model,
Okay.
it's 175 per hour. Before last year, I hadn't had a client in several years. Last year, I had kind of a breakthrough year for me, and I think I had 4 clients. This year, I've
Mm.
had 3 clients at this point. So women can make a living doing this. For me, it's not as lucrative. I don't make a living doing this work. I actually just love this work. I think it's so, so valuable that I'm willing to do it.
It's
Mhm.
I
amazing.
charge much less for doing
Yeah.
surrogate work than I do my other work, my other table type work. And I do a lot more as a surrogate than I would in my other work.
Yeah, just to give our audience some perspective, a lot of Tantra educators who have a private practice that are working with people individually, the typical range would be anywhere from like 275, 350, all the way up to 700 an hour. And that usually is dependent on if you're in an urban area or not and different cities and states. So I know like the sex industry in general and sex workers in general are working, there's a lot of legal constraints. So from a legality standpoint, where does this type of therapy um, fall
That's
under?
such a great question.
Is it legal in most
So that's
states?
the number 2 question that everybody always asks. It's or number 1 or 2. It's, flip back and forth between do you fall in love with your clients or, what's the legality issues? And the truth of the matter, and I'm not an attorney, so don't take this as legal advice, anybody that's out there. There are no laws against it other than apparently Texas, which I'm not sure actually that's true in Texas. And part of the reason why we do call ourselves surrogate partner therapists is because we're modeling a relationship, a partnership. It's not about intercourse. It's not about sex, not about touching genitals for pleasure or anything like that. It's about modeling a relationship so that these women, in my case, can understand what that's like. It's like trying to teach somebody how to sail from the shore. It's like, okay, this is what you do, or how to swim. That's another one I like to use. It's like, okay, here's how you do this kind of stroke. Now I'm going to throw you in the deep end of the pool and I'm going to walk away. And hopefully you don't drown. These women that are coming to us are terrified of men. In this particular case, I had one woman who she could not look me in the eyes. So the first time we're together, I do an intake type call like we would do in the other work as well. And she literally would look at me and then look away and then look at me and look away and just like do these drive-by peerings at me. And she could not get into any kind of relationship with a guy like that because they don't understand. They're not willing to go slow necessarily. I mean, a lot of men out there are very generous and would be willing to try to help support them if they understood what was going on, but they don't have the kind of training that I have to be able to be there to support them through whatever it is that's going on. And it's funny because that client eventually later on, she got to the point where she was so comfortable with me that she would come in bouncing into the room. And she was actually a very pretty woman. And that was the other thing that surprised me is I thought, okay, well, these aren't going to be stereotypically beautiful women. No,
A lot of
yeah,
them
I've had
are.
women who are just absolutely gorgeous. And part of their problem has been
Interesting.
because they were so beautiful, these men would not see them as a person, but see them as a conquest.
Mm,
And they just were like, no,
Right.
no, 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 no.
freeze
But
up.
this woman, she bounced
Yeah.
into my studio and she said, okay, well, what are we going to do today? I said, well, I think we're going to do a nice sensual massage, nude massage. She goes, okay, ripped her clothes off and jumped in the bed. That's how comfortable she got.
So I'm so curious, Dan, like what's your success rate? So with this woman in particular, like after you sort of had your conscious as uncoupling, which is another question, like at what point, how do you know? How do you know it's time for that part of the journey? And then I'm curious, like what happened for her? What happens for a lot of your clients? Do they go on then to find a partner?
So I don't know the answer to that necessarily.
Because you don't stay in
Yeah.
contact.
So part of our ethics is that I will never reach back out to my former client unless they reach out to me. And I've had several that have reached back out to me and they have been successful. One, in fact, she is now a sex educator getting her ASEC certification as a sex educator. And the reason that
Love
I
it.
know this is because I was at an ASEC conference and I ran into her and I'm like, oh, hey, how you doing? What's going on? What are you doing here? And she said, oh, well, the work that we had done together, she had been sexually assaulted by her stepsister when she was 10 and her stepsister was 18. And they grew up in, again, a very religious family. And she said, oh my God, this is horrible. I shouldn't have done this. And what's wrong with me? I was a bad person. And so she shut down sexually. And long story short, she came to me, worked with me. She was one of my shortest clients. I worked with her for about 6 months. And then because of her going through this trauma and dealing with it and working through it with me, she has decided that she wants to be an educator to go out to women and say, look, just because this happened to you does not make it your fault. You do have a valuable life that you can move forward with and you need to. And I'll be here to support you. So that's one of the biggest success stories that I'm aware of. Um, Others, I have no idea if they've gone and got married. I would love to know. So if any of you are out there seeing this, please let me know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shoot him an email. Show him
Yeah,
your wedding
sure.
ring.
But yeah, the other interesting thing is a number of the women that I've worked with, they've decided that they don't want to be in a monogamous relationship. They actually are exploring polyamory. Even this woman who's doing the training.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like,
Interesting.
especially the ones who are older, like I wasted a lot of time by myself. I don't want to be stuck with one guy. I want to see and experience multiple people more quickly in a very conscious way. And so I talk with them and teach them all about that and how it looks, works, and how to be empowered about as to what they
Yeah,
want.
that makes sense. Totally. Like making up for lost time and wanting to experience life and not just have one or two sexual experiences, but to feel like, yeah, I
Yep.
totally get that. Surprising, but I think that's really great.
And then to my other question, at what point on the journey do you know that it's time to go into the conscious uncoupling phase?
Yeah, who initiates that whole
So it can
process?
be any of us. Like I said
Mhm.
earlier, we're always asking the question, what's left to learn? So we walk through all the steps of relationship, love making, kissing, everything that's involved with that. And
So you're teaching them how to make
yeah,
out and stuff.
yeah, all of it.
Yeah.
And flirt,
Flirt.
teaching him
Yep.
how to
Mhm.
Yep.
flirt,
What about like
What's
oral
that?
sex? What about like
teaching him
oral
oral
sex
sex.
and stuff?
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Got to
Absolutely.
learn all
Yeah.
these things.
How to have
Yeah.
Important.
conversations like STI conversations with a potential partner, how to have conversations about, well,
That's
if
a
we
big
have
one.
sex, what does that mean? Does that mean now I'm your girlfriend? What are your desires in that relationship as compared to theirs? And so they are well armed with that kind of information moving forward. And so the question is always, what's left to learn? And I've had clients that we never got to the intercourse phase. Just the fact that they were with a man and comfortable with them, that's like, okay, I think I can do this. And that's great. I would love for their first experience to be with somebody that they're madly in love with and want to create a long-term relationship with. Um, if they fall in love with me and have that, that's great too. Super appreciate that. And that's not why I'm here, is to get that. I'm there to support them. Uh, and in some cases, it's really kind of because I had one that kept coming back, kept coming back, kept coming back. It's like, okay, well, I think it's time to move on now. I think we've pretty much covered everything. And then she came back a week later and said, no, we haven't. I realized that when we're together that I was saying things for you because I wanted to please you. Wow, that's an awesome, understanding and an insight for
Insight.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that was great. And so we continued on for another month or so. But any one of us can say at any time, okay, I think that, enough's enough. It's time for you to move on. The therapist stays with them. So when the work is done with me, then the therapist stays with the client. Say, okay, now how do we get you out into the dating realm? What do you need to do? Are you going to get onto online dating, and can we help you put a online profile together? Or you get into relationship and this relationship's not going to be like Dan because this person's not going to have the kind of knowledge and education that Dan has. He's going to have some desires and wants that are going to supersede something like what I would do. Is just, it's all for my clients. So how do they deal with those kinds of things and issues that come up around that? And then how do they deal with a breakup that isn't as conscious as the two of us would do?
Okay, sure, that makes sense. So, like, how long does the conscious uncoupling process take? Is it like one
Yeah.
conversation or is it multiple
Yeah.
sessions?
It's really probably, I'd say more like 2 sessions. We would realize that, this is probably going to be our last intimate session. And so we would have kind of a goodbye kiss type thing. And then she would come back for the next session, which would be totally more of the therapy style where we're sitting on the couch talking about it. And typically what I do in that is say, remember when you walked in and you couldn't even look me in the eyes and you were so nervous that you were
Mm.
vibrating on the couch? And now look at you. You're confident, you're smiling, you're radiant, you're ready to go out and conquer the world and meet people and get into relationship. And how amazing is that? And then we go.
So you're really curating them to their own confidence through this
Absolutely.
process so that they can step into the world with confidence, but also like a curiosity. Like, what can I create now? Like, wow, I just did that. I went through that process. I mean, it just seems like such a
Yeah.
hero's journey.
Right, like, I feel
Amazing.
like I know what I'm doing and I'm not in the
Yeah.
dark, and I can imagine just how scary that is when you feel inexperienced and how, like, inadequacy can be so
Yep.
isolating.
Well,
So
a perfect
debilitating.
example
Yeah.
is, they go to some social function and normally where they would be shy and any male attention that would come at them, they would be courteous but distant. And they would kind of be, shielding them off. Now, like, oh, wait, I can open myself up to that and I can be receptive to their moving towards me. And then where's that going to go for me? And so that's all things that they are able to do after they've left from me.
Now, you mentioned that you don't go on dates. Did I hear that correctly? Or do you do kind of go out to dinner so they can see what that's like, depending on their experience?
No, we typically don't go out to dinner with them or the movies or anything like that. In special circumstances, that has been known to happen, not with me, but I know with other surrogates that they have done that. Again, it's trying to keep the boundaries such that it's not like, if I'm out in public with this woman and a friend of mine comes by and sees me with this person and knows that I'm married to Elizabeth, then there may be issues. Or if I'm going to their place and they see me with
Oh.
them, then they're gonna be like, wait, what's going on here? Oh, you're dating. And then I'm going to be in the picture for a short period of time. And it's like, well, what happened to Dan?
Yeah.
Oh,
That makes
interesting.
sense
That
to
makes a
kinda
lot
keep
of
it
sense.
yeah, so that the outer community doesn't have to get involved with the inner
Right.
workings because it's really such a personal, transformation that you're supporting them through. I'm curious, again, another personal question, has Elizabeth ever had any hooks or
Reactions.
any envies or jealousies or anything with any of your surrogates
Not
along
at
the way?
all. Not at all. Yeah.
Amazing. Love
Um,
this woman. We gotta have her on the show
Yeah, oh, we'll
again.
definitely have her on. I've already been in contact with her
yeah.
going,
Good.
I want
She
you on the podcast.
recognizes this work for what it is and the value of the work we are doing. In fact, there used to be something in Boulder called Bedpost Confessions. And I knew the women who ran it. And I suggested to them one time that because they kept coming to me saying, hey, we'd love for you to get on and do something. I told my client at ASEC, I said, wow, that'd be really fun if we did this Bedpost Confessions and we didn't tell people that we had worked with each other, but we told both of our stories and see if they could figure it out. And so I presented that to the
Uh-huh.
women running the Bedpost Confessions, and they said, "Oh, that's amazing. So we're going to do it on sex work." So they had escort that was there, they had a pro dom that was there, they had my client, and they had me. And my client went second. And thing to know about my client is she is a university professor in English and literature. And so her writing is very elegant and very good and she's funny as hell. And she got up there and she started talking about her trauma and what had happened. And I wish we had had it recorded, but we weren't supposed to. And she talked about the work that we had done together. She said, yeah, I needed something to break out of this. I'm now in my 50s and I've never been in a relationship with a man. I like men and I've seen couples in relationships and I kind of am envious of that. I want that. And she talked about some of the silly things that we did. Like one time I walked in with stripper underwear. I had stripper underwear on underneath my pants. So I took my pants off. I had this little thing with a cobra and little tail and it, it was in fun. And of course she made it sound like I did it because I thought it was hot, but whatever.
Yeah.
But then I got up to talk and it's like, well, is the work that I do sex work? So I'll let you guys decide. It's like, I work with women. I do this for them. I've had women who have been empowered to be, successful women in the world around relationship. And a number of my clients are successful business wise already anyway. And then I started talking about surrogate partner therapy and about my perspective of working with clients and even shared some of the stories that I had with this client. And then finally, towards the end, I said, hopefully one of these days you'll see how amazing these women are. And by meeting them, you'll see that they're just really amazing women and can be super successful. And of course, tears are everywhere. I couldn't keep talking anymore. And um, my client came
Oh,
up and hugged. And at that point in time, if people couldn't figure it out, they did. And so we got standing ovation.
well,
Yeah, this was your client. Yeah.
oh,
Oh, wow. That's
swoon.
It
amazing.
still
I
gets me
love
even
it.
to this day.
Yeah.
Um,
What a cool
beautiful.
job,
It is.
right?
It's the best.
So, how would a therapist get in contact with you or another surrogate partner therapist uh, if they had a client that could really use this type of
So
support?
the best way is for them to go to the IPSA website and there are referrals. There's a referral network there. There's a therapist who's on staff that will talk with the client or the therapist and have an interview with them and say, okay, this is what you're looking for. I've got a great surrogate in your area that could do that, or it might be an intensive model, whatever it might be. But they would talk to them about how it would look and what it would look like, all that stuff. So that's really the best way. So women who contact me through my website, pleasureengineer.com, when I'm interviewing them about what kind of work they want to do, um, I'll find out and I'll get a sense. It's like, wait, this sounds like a surrogate model would be perfect. And if that's the case, then what I will do is refer them to a therapist that I've worked with in the past because the therapist needs to work with them, make sure that they're actually ready for this work. They don't just come in off the street and we say, okay, let's go to town here. It's like, no, they've got to work with a therapist. Therapist needs to understand who they are, what kind of traumas they have in their past. We don't work with with bipolar or borderline personality disorder people, because that's just dangerous for everybody. And that therapist should evaluate and assess them for that. And then when that therapist thinks that this person is ready, then they would contact me, or they would contact IPSA. And IPSA would interview them and say, okay, yeah, I think that your client is ready for a surrogate. Here is a surrogate that you can work with. And then it would go from there.
Yeah. So it's very vetted, which is important, really making sure that they're ready for this process. Such a deep journey. And like for you too, like you're really putting so much into it, opening your heart and, bringing all of your
Mhm.
expertise to this person so that they can become more in the world. So earlier in our conversation, this super fascinating conversation, you said something about your work in the world, like as if this isn't just your work in the world, like you've got other stuff that you're putting out into the world. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So I'm a former software engineer and I have an MBA. And
That's when
that's
I
when you
met
met me.
Dan.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, we've known each other for well over a decade, and I
Oh,
remember
we're going on like
you were still
18
an
years now.
engineer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was at your first beginner's weekend.
Yep.
I think it was one of my first beginner weekends
Well,
teaching,
no, Caroline
and,
taught my first
oh, was
one. Yeah.
Caroline
You
there?
were at the second one. You were at the intermediate weekend.
I might have been the event coordinator maybe for the
That may
first
be
one.
true.
Or were you at the intermediate? Anyways,
Anyways.
we can talk about that offline.
Um, yeah. So I was in the corporate world, being the engineer. I love learning. I love expanding what's going on. So I had done this training. I had never had conversations like this before. Like, wait a minute, we can talk about sex without how quickly can I get you in bed and fuck your brains out and that kind of stuff. I mean, that was the mentality that I had, which is common in the United States.
The
Yeah.
Mhm.
norm.
And it was amazing that I could have conversations about, well, what's pleasurable for you? And how do we slow this down? And how can I have multiple orgasms? And how can I even just enjoy the journey and not have to ejaculate? I had to ejaculate every time I had sex before. And while I was still in the corporate world, I was learning more and more and more. So I've done Kodoshka, which is a Native American tradition of spiritual shamanic sexuality. I've done Human Awareness Institute. I've done some stuff with Deborah Sandal, who's the queen of female ejaculation. I've done, God, I can't even remember all
The
the things that I've
blueprints,
done. What was that?
the
I've done erotic
blueprints,
blueprint. That was a more recent
the erotic
thing.
blueprints.
I've done somatic sex education, sexological body work,
All
all the
the
different
training.
All
things
the
like that.
tantra.
I've even done some
All of it.
university courses, and I looked at getting a certification or a degree from some kind of a university. And the problem that I have with universities is that they're all about the dysfunction of sex. They're all about
Not
theory and
the
dysfunction
positive
and
side.
not about
Yeah.
pleasure. There's nothing that's really pleasure
Mhm.
based in this world. In fact, grants that are out there for studies do not fund things that are for pleasure, only for the dysfunction side.
Yeah, it's like all illness,
Yep.
dysfunction
Yep.
forward.
And about 10 years into it, I just remember driving into work and seeing the building off in the distance and thinking, damn, I've got 5 more days of having to do this drive. And even on Friday, it's like, oh, I've got 1 more day. And then I was getting to the point where even Sundays I didn't like because now I'm going to be at work tomorrow. And I finally decided that's it. I'm out of here. So I started a conference called Beyond the Bedroom, which was a sex education conference for consumers. And I would bring in experts to talk about everything under the sun, from Tantra, how to talk to your kids about sex, BDSM, swinging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And my philosophy is that education is power. If you understand and know what it is that you want, you can make informed decisions about going into anything. So swinging is a perfect example. I'm not a swinging expert, so I brought some experts in that will talk about it. And these people could go in a very safe place where they could look at it and say, well, is this something that I want or we as a couple want to do? And at the end of it, if they decided yes, well, now they've got somebody who they already now know in the swinging community that can help hold their hand as they walk into, a club, for example, or something like that. Then, unfortunately, in 2013, we had huge floods in Colorado, and half my presenters were being evacuated from their homes by helicopter. And just we had to
Wow.
cancel the event. And that's when I
I
decided that
remember that.
I just can't do this and put all my eggs in this one basket. So I started expanding into other things. So I do private coaching work. I expanded and did the erotic blueprints, which you may have seen on the Goop series. Yeah, Netflix
Netflix.
Goop,
Mm.
Sex, Love, and Goop. And
Yep.
there's another woman, Caitlin V, who's on Discovery Plus, Good Sex, and she's a blueprint coach as well. And so it's just amazing work that's out there, and that's the stuff that I do as well, coaching predominantly women, but I'm expanding into men because all the women that I've worked with say, "Can you teach my partner how to
My
be
man.
better?"
Right.
And so that's the work
Yes.
that I'm starting to expand into.
Now, with the beyond the bedroom work, I know you guys did a lot of video interviews. Is there still a place to watch some of that content or absorb some of that content that's out
Yeah.
there?
So bedevents.com has, I believe, all my videos. The website is kind of stagnant because I've been moving more in this other direction. Right now, my private work is through pleasureengineer.com, but my online training, and I have a sex toy store with all my favorite sex toys that I use for clients, things like that.
Oh, we want to be, yeah,
Is
tell us
that
about
on your
Not yet.
that.
website?
So
Pleasure Engineer?
Pleasure
Not yet. Okay.
Engineering is
But it
the
will
new
be.
website, and then there will be a link to it. Okay, I'm an engineer. I love this work, and I've used all these different tools and instruments. And while sex is more of an art than an engineering aspect, you still have a bunch of different tools that you can apply to different situations. And so that's my sex toy box behind me. So I have tons and tons of sex toys that I
That's
use.
a very big
It
box,
looks like
Dan.
that's like a
That's a
like a
tower.
Yep.
handyman
Yep.
toolbox
Yeah.
back
You
there.
oftentimes see these in men's garages where they've got all their
You
tools.
have some
Well,
screws. Yeah.
this has all my tools. I talked to a
I love
cousin-in-law,
it.
and he's a big mechanic and loves all this type of work. I said, "Hey, what's a really good toolbox?" He goes, "Oh yeah, go to Home Depot and they've got Husky one. It's really good." I was like, "Okay." And so that's what I got. And it was funny because he was over, he came down and he saw it and he said, "Well, how come that's not in the garage?" I'm like, "Oh, it doesn't matter." And he started opening up the drawers and says, dildos and vibrators, this
Oh.
and that. And he quickly closed the doors and walked on. But his wife said, "Oh, really?" And she came over, started opening them up and looking through them all.
She's all, oh, this
Yep.
looks
You-
fun.
that was another question I had is from engineer to sexuality expert. I mean, how much does your family know, right? I think you've got kids and like what do you say? How do you approach this with family members who may find this intimidating?
So that's a really great question. On my side of the family, I don't hold anything back. I don't throw it in their face either. My mom has seen stuff on um, Facebook, which I rarely get on anymore. And she's seen some of the work that I do, and she's proud of me. She says, "Yeah, I really respect and honor what you're doing for women." My dad doesn't really talk about it that much, so I don't force it down his throat or anything like that. My kids, I talk to them about sex, especially when I was raising them, and they're getting coming of age. I definitely wanted them to be better when it came to interacting with people. Um, so I don't hide it from them at all. Elizabeth's side of the
Hmm.
family is a little bit different. They come from a family where to be seen and known that way, there's a lot of shame around it in the Midwest where she's from. But her sister had me come out and do a presentation at her boss's house. And we had
Oh,
10 women there, and I was talking about all the work that I do. So one of her sisters absolutely knows everything that I do. I don't throw it in their faces either. I try not to. Every once in a while, I screw up because I get so caught up and excited about talking about it that I'll let things slip that Elizabeth would prefer that I didn't say. But
hmm, yeah. Okay, cool. That
It's
sounds.
always so interesting to see how the family responds
Hmm.
to those of us in this work. And
Yeah.
yeah, you never know. It can be so surprising to be like, who's open to it and interested in it versus who's like, "Mm, I'm not going to talk about that."
I notice it's a big question as people go through the Source Tantra certification process. When they're
Mm.
really new, it's, well, what do you tell people that you do?
I
And
loved one of your answers, Leah. One time you said, "I just told my grandma that I just help people love each other more."
yeah, yeah, like 10, maybe it was like 15 years into my career. She's like, so honey, what do you do? And so after making some blunders, and what I mean by blunders is saying more than what someone can hear, and it feels painful to me when I feel like they are now uncomfortable. It
Mhm.
it hits something inside of my heart that makes me kind of go, ooh, like to close. And so I learned early on that to love myself and to love them was to really be able to notice how much they could hear. And if I know them well, then I can really respect that, right? There's an attunement that you can kind of drop into and go, okay, this would be too much and this is just
Yeah.
enough. And so
And
I
that
kind of
goes
have a
beyond
handful of pet answers.
yeah, and that goes beyond family members.
It
That's just like
does.
for people in general, especially as you're stepping more and more into your sexual power, sexual sovereignty,
Yeah, because
what have you.
you'll be sitting next to someone on an airplane, right? And a
Mhm.
common question is, so what do
I
you do?
love those
Right.
questions.
And I've had all right. Have you guys had like really interesting
Would you really
conversations
like
on
to know?
planes?
Yeah.
And then there's like elevator rides where you really
Right.
only have 30 seconds and someone will ask you that question. And so
Uh-huh.
like you got your
No,
one
I've got a
liner.
really fun story
Um,
about that. Yeah, I do ski patrol work as a volunteer.
okay.
And right after I had started doing this work in the early days, I was talking to some woman at the bar on patrol and just like diarrhea of the mouth, just vomiting all this stuff all over her. And finally, after about 20 minutes of all this conversation, I could just see her jaw was on the floor. And I said, "Oh, I probably told you a little bit too much, haven't I?" And she's kind of like, "Uh-huh." But
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
2 weeks later, she came up to me and said, "When you were saying all that stuff, one thing you said stuck in my mind, and I wanted to ask you more about that." So knowing that I
Oh,
wasn't
cool.
coming from it, this fraternity boy attitude or sophomoric,
Yeah.
because I'm just talking about it passionately about things that are available, they start to realize that, oh,
Mhm.
he's not this, you know,
He's not trying to pick me up by being
Right.
yeah,
impressive with
He's
his
just
things
yep,
he's
he's
sharing
not the
what he
saying.
creepy guy
knows.
trying to get
Yeah.
in my pants and do anything. He's just talking about facts and information, and I want to know more about what he said around this. And so that's happened.
And I mean, I wanna know more, Dan. I think we need to have Dan on again. Maybe we could have Dan talk about, becoming a multi-orgasmic man sometime in
Yes,
the future. That would
that's
be
Okay.
fun.
right. Yes. So
Um, we have had so much fun just listening to and expanding our minds, reimagining what's possible. And Dan, you do have a gift for
Mhm.
our audience. 5 tips for pleasuring a woman. What a valuable gift. Do you wanna tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
So, Cosmo and all those kinds of magazines always come out with these greatest tips kind of thing. And recently somebody asked me, he's like, okay, what are your tips? And thought thought back long and hard on it in the work that I've done and what women seem to have appreciated. And so I put together a list of 5 that I think are hugely valuable, that are going to be valuable to a relationship and to women in particular. And like one of them, for example, is education. The fact that if there's a guy here listening to this conversation right now and it's spurred them on to being better, then that is hugely valuable. Going and doing a Tantra weekend with Source Tantra or anywhere else is hugely valuable. The more information that you have, which was the reason for Beyond the Bedroom, is it just you have knowledge that makes you better at meeting the person that you're with and understanding it. Most of us, I came into this world before porn was a big thing, at least on the internet, because I came of age before the internet happened. But there's still videos that were out there. And where did I learn how to have sex? It's, through experimentation with my girlfriends, because I had no freaking clue what I was doing. But porn was the next one, which I think porn is great as an entertainment tool, but not a sex education. And most of us have used it as sex education. And I think that's wrong.
Right.
And so learning from some other sources that are credible sources, Kuroshka, Tantra, sexological body work, somatic sex education, all those kinds of things. I think it's just hugely, hugely valuable.
And so this is a gift that you're giving us is a little condensed version of all of these things that you have learned and curated and kind of birthed through you as an engineer too. I just love it.
I love that. Great, great.
Well, and it's going to get even more geeky
Engineer
because
pleasure.
I've gotten all these
Do it.
tools to measure like how much vibration there is in vibrators and how much sound they make. Because I know one big fears that women have is like, well, is it going to be too loud? My kid's going to hear it.
The
So
kids
I'm
can
I'm
hear
going to
it.
say, okay, here's
Right.
the quietest ones. Here's the loudest ones.
Yeah, I need a new quiet one. The ones I have are like way too loud, and it's
Dan
starting to
has a
annoy me.
referral
I
for
do.
you,
Yeah.
I'm
I
sure.
do.
So, Dan, you did mention a sex toy store. Is that something that's available now, or is that something
That's
we
something
can
I'm
order?
working on. I'm hoping to have it done within the next month. I don't care about
Oh,
Christmas type stuff, so I'm not trying to get it done for Christmas sales or anything like that. This is really more of a side note for me in the work that I do. But I keep hearing about men being afraid of sex toys, women fearing and not knowing how to use them properly or anything like that. So that's what I really want to start getting out there as part of my overall sex education plan.
Love
okay.
that.
So
Super
we will
valuable.
have the link to that free gift that you can download. I believe it's
Mhm.
a PDF. We will have a link to uh, the Surrogate partner therapy
Mhm.
website, and we'll have a link to Dan's personal website as well. So, Dan, once you get your sex toy store up and running, we will update the show
Perfect.
notes so that it's available for listeners.
Yeah. So much fun. Thank you so
So much
much
good
for being
stuff.
with us today. This has been
Yeah.
an absolute pleasure.
I can't wait to come visit you with Matthew and eat our way through Boulder
Mm,
and shop
yes, and
and
drink.
visit and talk shop. So, talk shop. Go shopping, go eating, all the stuff in Boulder. Hike.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll have to teach me skiing because that's one thing that I've never done. It kind of scares me.
Make sure you guys get a video of
You
Leah on
teach?
skis.
I'll have you rescue me because I'll probably need it.
You'll be right there to
Yeah,
rescue
I
her.
have a personal
Perfect.
phone number. Let me just get it out.
All right.
All right, give our love to Elizabeth and tell her we can't wait to have her on. Thank you. Love, love,
Thank you,
love.
everyone. Ciao.
Now, our favorite part, the dish.
Okay, let's dish it out, girlfriend.
Let's
Mr.
dish on
Dan
Dan.
Towers.
Oh my God. Fucking loved Dan's interview. I'm going to have to say, maybe my most favorite interview of all time. I mean, we've had some really, really interesting interviews. Like, I just so much love our interviews with drawing a blank on her name, but and not Anatomy of Woman's
Oh, Sherry
Sherry.
and
Love Sherry
Allison,
and Allison. I mean,
Mare,
we've got so
yeah,
many good ones.
Elaine, so many
I
good
think
ones.
maybe because what Dan was talking about, surrogate partner therapy, I had just never heard of this before. I didn't know anything about it. So it was so fascinating to me. And and coming from an engineer's brain, he's an engineer. Like that's his training. He's got this engineer brain. And so I just the way that he spoke to this totally out of the box way of healing, helping people heal their way of being in relationship, intimacy, or not being in intimacy, as the case may be, was just so refreshing.
Yeah, I always thought it was sex surrogacy work, right? So, um, Dan mentioned that Helen Hunt movie. I remember watching that, and I've had some colleagues who are been sex surrogates at some point in their career, and I knew that it was connected to working with a therapist, and that it was more there was more legal. Um, oh, what's the word?
Ramifications.
No, because it has less ramifications
Uh,
legally, actually. So,
yeah, it's
yeah,
not.
anyways,
It
it was
doesn't.
legal as
It's
compared to
legal.
so much other sex work modalities that are
Hmm.
really helping people. So, sex surrogacy has a legitimacy because of the third party therapist that's involved. So, understanding the difference between sex surrogacy and surrogate partner therapy was super helpful.
Yeah.
And I think it's just something that people don't even know exists, who really need to know that it exists so that they can get the support that they need.
Oh, yeah.
And that so many of the people who do the work are virgins, and they're sort of
Clients.
way
Clients.
past that like coming of age portion where most people will have encountered sex. And also we didn't really talk much about it, but I can totally see how the religious stuff comes into play in sort of stunting some of our development regarding our sexuality. And I just think the work he does is, man, so needed.
Oh my God, so needed. Like I could think of like 10 clients off the top of my head who could use a partner surrogate.
It's yeah, to like go through the stages, because man, the isolation that arises when you feel like you've missed your chance at love and sexuality. I've worked with a handful of middle-aged virgins, men, and have had the privilege to hold space for that embarrassment, for that fear of missing out, for the pain that arises, that embarrassment, and to be able to just sort of normalize, and what these partner surrogates are doing is teaching such incredible skill sets so they have confidence and can go out and discover sexual love.
Yeah, and it's like the angel. I feel like, Dan's an angel and people who do this work are angels because I mean they really are opening their hearts. They truly are getting into a relationship with their clients, like an intimate relationship with their clients to the point of intercourse. Some of the
Hmm.
time, a lot of the time. And meanwhile, Dan's married to an amazing, so we got to really like, wow, just look into the
That portal.
possibilities. I mean, talk about sex reimagined. I think that's what it was about this episode in particular.
Hmm.
Like, my mind was completely opened to possibilities that I had no concept of before this episode. So that to me is inspiring, and Dan really just shows up with I don't know, just like, yep, just that's the way it is, and it's just there's like a simpleness and a straightforwardness to his delivery. It's so, digestible. It makes sense. It's not out there. It's easy to follow. He's
He's
just
very
like
matter of fact. He's
the
got that engineer part of how he
exactly.
processes information. And it was so sweet actually to hear him have a moment like in one of the stories where he felt tender, like an emotional, like remembering one of his clients and being on stage. And I was like, oh, damn, there's those like softer feelings, because he can be so like matter of fact. And it's part of his genius zone, right? It's like really great because he's able to articulate really well something that really can be very complex. And I was just in a seminar with Dan this past weekend. And so seeing sort of how people can get really emotional, but Dan's always pretty stoic, and it's not that he's not emotional, but I just really kind of crumbled in a yummy, yummy way when he was speaking about something that was meaningful to him.
You gotta listen to the episode to really understand what this type of therapy truly is and what it brings to people. And
Well, what I really appreciate is the distinctions, right? Because it could potentially be very messy.
yes.
And I think it's so intelligent that there's a therapist that's helping the client process what could potentially be their own emotional like bonding instincts that eventually could lead to a really kind of something devastating, because someone's really not going to continue with you. So the fact that even the breakup is super conscientious, I love that there are boundaries regarding, okay, we're not going to play all out relationship,
Right.
because we're still in a therapeutic container. I
Yeah.
have another life. I
Mhm.
may have other clients, so we're not going to do the full out relationship,
Yeah, like,
but
I'm not gonna be texting you and
yeah,
sexting you and giving you little dopamine hits like that.
right.
That's not
We're not
part
going to
of
go
this
on like
package.
ongoing dating where we're going
Yeah.
to go to movies together and stuff like that. But I could see he did say there are cases where that specifically may be valuable,
Mhm.
because to boost the confidence of someone who's never been on a date,
Mhm.
let's go through the process and the steps of what a date might look like so that you feel like you've had the experience, so you feel less inadequate,
Mhm.
right? But that sort of doing that regular dating stuff, whether that's texting, phone calling, going out and doing things out in the world, is inappropriate in this context. And the other thing I hadn't thought of was the impact that it has on community. right? Because it could really confuse people who see you out in the
Totally.
world who may not know all these ins and outs of your professional life.
Yeah.
Or could confuse the person who is the client
Mhm.
running into people that they know that may really confuse, well, what are they doing? Oh, they're, I just thought that was super smart.
Well, and I imagine there already is going to be some level of confusion for the client because
Right.
they have never had a relationship before. Potentially that
Or
might be, or that they're healing from all the terrible relationships that they've
yeah,
had
or
before through somebody who is educated and knows how to guide them into what it looks like to be in a healthy relationship. And it's like that's almost to be expected, that confusion that the client's gonna have to go through, and Dan is this therapist, surrogate
and
therapist.
he's handsome.
Yeah, has
He
to
sort of
hold
has like this
that.
quintessential, he's super tall, he's in
Yeah,
great shape, he's a handsome guy, right? So you could see how someone could easily want to I want to be Dan's number one, like how do I get in there? And that's really common in a lot of intimate experiences. So I think it's got a good container. Um, and I could imagine like, oh, I would want to like if I had a really positive experience with a client like that, I would want to stay friends and like having to go, no,
yeah,
that's a limit we're not going to cross either because
yeah,
that could be confusing.
yeah, at the end of so this whole process, it's like it could take anywhere from 2 weeks, like an intensive, to I think up to
He said
like
up
a
to like
year,
he worked with someone once for 3 years.
3 years. Okay,
Yeah,
so
but I think it's
really.
typically about a year.
Yeah, so it's like it's however long it takes for the client to get to a point where they're like, "Okay, I'm ready to do this relationship thing in a healthy way."
Well, I think one of the things he said is here's the question: what else is there to learn?
Right.
And then once you reach that place of going, this is all I have to teach,
Yeah,
then that's the end. And prolonging it actually isn't
in
useful at that
service.
point, right?
Yeah.
Because now they need to go stretch their wings and fly. Um, and both Willow and I can't remember if we've talked about this yet in any of our little portions. But we both sort of had a moment of going, could I do this work? Like, what would it look like if I did this work? And I was trying to think of like, what would my limits be? Because teaching someone how to give or receive oral sex, where I'm the one that's a part of the providing or the receiving, would be an edge for me.
Mm.
And I could also had a moment of going, and wouldn't it have been amazing to have someone teach you how to give a great blowjob?
Right.
Like it would have been there through their lens of their own body,
Right.
and I know that they practice really safe sex and all of those parameters are built into the system because again, yeah, he's in a committed relationship and
Mhm.
he has a responsibility to also keep his wife safe.
Yeah.
So when you all that STI
TI.
information is like included in how to do this well. But those were two things that really came up for me. I was like, okay, how far could I go in providing this kind of support? And do you have to provide everything as a therapist in this role? I don't remember getting a clear answer about that, but that's a leftover question for me.
Well, for him, it was. He was all in. So if somebody was coming and he said too, like, the doorway for a lot of people to get into this kind of therapy is that they want to learn how to have sex, right?
Yeah.
They want to learn about their own sexuality and have someone teach them and have someone teach them how to be in relationship and intimacy and all of that. And so for him personally, he's committed. If that's one of the pieces that somebody is really needing and wanting from him, then he's committed to giving that. However, he also said that sometimes they get in and all
Yeah,
this
they
other
may not go
inner
all that way.
deep work happens, yeah, and they might not need it in the end. What was so fascinating was that there's only 3 men
I know.
doing this work and many more women doing this work, which does make sense,
Makes
right?
sense. Yeah, right. Because there's maybe not, there's probably a lot of women who don't know that this is available for them, this type of therapy is available for them. And then, of course, all of our cultural conditioning around
Yeah.
women and sex and what's okay and what's not okay. You could totally see how that would stop the trajectory of expansion. Yeah, I mean, it makes me want to go. I hope people listen to this episode and who need it go, please go to the episode page for this and
Show notes.
do your research, whether that's because you want to be the kind of compassionate therapeutic provider that is able to support people through this process, or whether you need this process. And if you're a therapist who is inspired to actually help both the surrogate and the client come together and do this work. I mean, all three roles, so valuable, so cool. So
Amazing.
really have a
Amazing
lot of
work.
respect for this program.
Yeah. So let us know what you think. Let us shoot us a DM or send us an email. Send and put a comment actually in the comment section and give us a little like, because we want to hear from you and we really want this to get out to a wider audience, because talk about rewiring what's possible in intimacy. This is definitely a big episode for that.
Yeah, and we hang out on Instagram, but the biggest thing you could do for us if you're enjoying the podcast is to go to the streaming service that you most use and please subscribe, and not just like give us a thumbs up, but share a comment. Let us know what you like about the podcast or what you like about the episode. It just, you can't imagine how much it helps spread this podcast into the algorithm that goes worldwide. So please, please. Love, love, love.
We
And we'll
love you
catch
so
you on the
much.
flip side.
See you soon.
Ciao.
Thanks for tuning in. If the hosts seem to know what they were talking about, that's because they do. Leah Piper is a tantric sex master coach and a positive psychology facilitator. Dr. Willow Brown is both a Chinese and functional medicine doctor and a Taoist sexology teacher. Don't forget, your comments, likes, subscribes, and suggestions matter. Let's realize this new world together.